Coming up, the NBA playoffs roll on, but down in Miami, the heat is turned up on Jimmy Butler. We talk about Pat Riley's quotes, what it means for not only that team, but the NBA Eastern landscape as a whole. We dive into it coming up next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. He's Doug Norrie. I'm Adam Armbrecht. We thank you, as always, for making us your first listen of the day. We are 100% free on all those great platforms. And let you know, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. And Doug, my goodness, we talk about NBA playoffs. We talk about how it impacts the Brooklyn Nets, but Jimmy Butler's doing the work. He's not in the playoffs. He's got things to say. And if you think it doesn't matter, go ask one Pat Riley, GM, man in charge down in Miami.
Well, the best part about only having 30 teams in the NBA is that when something happens with one, it does have a trickle-down effect to all. Like, it doesn't necessarily impact every team each time, but with teams in transition like the Nets are, it's worth checking in on every good player at this point, because we know that the Nets plan over the next couple years is to hopefully add some other team's good player. I mean, when you don't have a lot of your own draft picks, your whole plan is going to be like, hey, you want to come over here and play? Like that's gonna, and when that's going to be the strategy, we do have to do check-ins on all these other guys, because they could be guys that end up on Sean Marks and company's radar, especially if they end up shaking loose in situations where we didn't think that was going to be the case. And that could end up being the case with Jimmy Butler. And if it is, even if he did not come to the Nets, which I mean, I probably think is unlikely, him even being on the move, or the talk of him being on the move, would have trickle-down effects. So before we even get to the talk of Riley, which I want to go through these quotes, which are fast, awesome quotes by Pat Riley. But would you agree that even if we don't do a one-to-one Jimmy Butler, like, we're not going to title this Jimmy Butler to the Nets ? But like, but
I hope it ends up being the title. I hope that ends up being the title.
It's gonna be. I'm just gonna call it that. But even if he were to move, we know that these things have cascading effects. Like, one guy like this moving anywhere has a cascading effect across the rest of the NBA. Because anytime you do that with top 20, 25, whatever guys, he's higher. That's just going to be what happens.
Yeah, I mean, listen, you mentioned it, only 30 teams. Think about it like musical chairs, right? All of a sudden, everyone's up, everyone's dancing, the music stops. And if all of a sudden Jimmy Butler sits down in your seat, now you have to go find another chair. Yeah. Now one of those spots gets taken away. And specifically, if we just keep it germane to the Miami Heat and how it starts to create a ripple effect, it's not just, oh, well, where could Jimmy Butler go? The Brooklyn Nets, any other major contending team. Miami is not an organization that sits there and says, and now we'll go into a bit of a soft rebuild and we'll see what the landscape looks like. They are a stalwart organization. They are well respected. And there are always players that look at them and go, oh, okay, yeah, I want to go to a place. It was Damian Lillard wanted to go there. Couldn't get there, but Damian Lillard just wanted to go there last offseason. So I think that right there, just one player from one team, and all of a sudden you introduce another team out of the 30 that is in the market to be bringing in new players, and probably high-profile ones at that.
And it's all about like heat culture. And I guess heat culture is kind of like a meme or just like a saying, but it's really kind of not at this point. I mean, they do exemplify a certain sort of like set of principles that they adhere to militantly, right? Almost. And
an old school,
kind of works.
An old school NBA style.
Totally, but they punch above their weight almost every time, right? Like it's kind of crazy how they're able to do this year in, year out. And so one of these, I mean, one of the most heat culture quotes ever here is from Pat Riley, where, because after, just to sum up two parts of this, Jimmy Butler gets on, doesn't play obviously in the Boston series, and then basically says, oh, if we had been fully healthy, we would have taken out, I'm summarizing this, but we would have taken out the Celtics and we would have taken out the Knicks, right? Like, that's what he says while he's in street clothes. and just like makes these proclamations. Well, Pat Riley gets up there and said, I'm going to read these ones verbatim. One is, I thought, is that Jimmy trolling or is that Jimmy being serious? If you're not on the court playing against Boston or on the court playing against New York Knicks, you should keep your mouth shut in your criticism of those teams, which I thought is, I mean, you very rarely hear an executive or a coach or anybody call out one. The next one's even more damning, but you very rarely hear a coach or anybody, a GM, president of the operations, call out a player explicitly and be like, shut up. Right. Like, don't say that. Yeah, but I mean, not even maybe, you should. Like, you should shut up. Like, don't say this stuff. It doesn't help anybody. And that, in a league where, egos, and I don't even mean that bad way. These guys should have massive egos, and, their brands are like kind of the thing. You just don't hear guys saying this. But then the next quote, because we know that Jimmy Butler, there might be some Jimmy Butler extension stuff that he'd have to get into. The next quote even gets even more to like, oh, Miami might just be fully done here, because just a note too, Butler's extension eligible. He's under contract for next year with the player option after. The next quote by Pat Riley is, it's a big decision on our part to commit those kinds of resources unless you have someone who's going to be available every night. And that's him replying 1-to-1 on the Jimmy Butler extension. So he basically says, 1, shut up. 2, you don't play all the games. Yeah. So maybe we don't want to extend you. I mean, these are fascinating quotes from Riley.
No, and it's also the idea of, for a player in Jimmy Butler, who we remember, go back to, because Butler himself is a fascinating player. He's 34, gonna be 35 years old, but it was always like, well, is he really that caliber of player? And then when he went to Miami, all of a sudden, it doesn't end up in Philadelphia, or ends up in Philadelphia for a very brief amount of time, doesn't stay there. When he gets to Miami, it's almost like, oh, right, that little thing you saw when he played next to Embiid and what could have been in Philadelphia, he goes to Miami, executes on that, and helps elevate that entire franchise for the past 3-4 seasons. And to me, it is fascinating, because for what he's gotten paid as a superstar, high-level elite talent, now you're at the crossroads of age, direction of the franchise, where the value lies, and all of these things. If you think Pat Riley isn't 1,000% aware of absolutely every single angle of this as the offseason begins, you're telling yourself an absolute lie, because he's done a phenomenal job, even if it does feel like it comes at the cost of personal relationships with players that he's had in that franchise. So coming up here in a second, I want to talk about what it could mean for the Miami Heat and for the NBA East and for the Brooklyn Nets. But he also talked about Tyler Hero, which I just think is fun to reflect on, given where we once were discussing potential big blockbuster. We'll fix that in post. Trades involving him coming to Brooklyn as well. We'll get to that in just one moment.
All right, before we get to that, tell you about our friends over at DoorDash. Look, we got Mother's Day right around the corner. You want to make mom smile. Maybe you're kind of like me, or maybe we would qualify this as like a last minute kind of guy. Maybe just think about things. You're thinking about it, but when it comes to actually executing on the gift, you might be a little bit under the gun, right up to the buzzer. This is where DoorDash can jump in and help make Mother's Day special. You surprise her with gifts from brands she loves, delivered the very same day with DoorDash. You love to hear that. Moms are a gift. Give her the best this Mother's Day. Give her gifts as thoughtful as she is with DoorDash. You can select from hundreds of expertly crafted bouquets to the best of tech, self-care essentials, and more. Look, DoorDash isn't just about food. You can get all this different kinds of stuff delivered to your door. Maybe the mom's got a sweet tooth. Maybe she's into the tech. Maybe she's into the beauty, or she's just an outdoorsy kind of type. All of that is available for you over on DoorDash. Get all your Mother's Day gifts all in one place. Get 50% off your next order, up to $15 when you spend $15 plus on your next flour, convenience, grocery, or retail order now with the code LOCKEDONNBA. That's LOCKEDONNBA. Order using DoorDash today. Terms apply. And when you're done with that, head on over to our friends over at LinkedIn. LinkedIn Jobs is the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free when you're hiring for your small business. You want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's the whole name of the game, the right people to fit within your team to get the job done. LinkedIn isn't just another job board. It's a vast network of more than 1 billion professionals. Makes it the best place to hire. Gives you access to professionals you can't find anywhere else. LinkedIn does all this while making the process easy and intuitive. Look, LinkedIn knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats, they might not have the time or the resources to hire. That's why they're constantly finding new ways to make the process easier. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply.
All right, as we continue our Locked On Nets episode, not only talking about Jimmy Butler, maybe a little bit of Tyler Hero, but all about the Brooklyn Nets, baby, and what it means for them this off season. You mentioned Jimmy Butler coming into this year. He obviously has another player option coming up for 25-26, $48.798677 million. I don't know if it's the 77 extra bucks it's going to cost you here. At a price point that high, let's talk about the Brooklyn Nets specifically with Jimmy Butler. Is there any realistic world where you think the Nets are involved in a player like this, shy of it being, as is always a classic, well, if you take Ben Simmons, and we're always open to discussing. We're always open for ideas.
I was going to say, do you think Ben Simmons is a Heat culture kind of guy? I mean, is it like over the last few years, has he been the kind of guy that you're when you think of availability? Yeah, it's a great. I mean, I hate to like rag on the guy because he's been injured, but also at the same time, I would say even prior to injury, I would not have thought that the Ben Simmons and Heat culture Venn diagram had a lot of overlap to it, and this is prior to him being hurt. So I just don't get. I mean, unless the Heat Met Gala clock briefcases showing up, the kind of thing.
Sherlock Holmes meet Flavor Flav. I think it was a good combo.
I wasn't sure if you saw that picture. I wasn't sure if you're going to get what I did. If you haven't seen what Ben Simmons wore to the Met Gala, I mean, it was on.
The kids call it drip, I think, but I don't know.
I'm no fashionista, so I guess I can't comment. No, but I don't think that like Ben Simmons, even in his best of days, would be considered a guy that like would have espoused Heat culture, or the kind of guy the Heat really would have wanted to bring in. So I don't think that's really a realistic option for if you are thinking about adding Jimmy Butler to your team at this point because of the $42 million. That $52 million player option in 25-26, that's an interesting one. I think there's a world where he picks that up, like no matter where he is, like depending on injury and some other stuff. Like I'm not 100% that he would get more money. That he probably would, but it's at least a little interesting. But I don't think the Nets have the scratch because I don't think Simmons is a guy that the Heat could sell themselves a story on.
No, Mikal Bridges is the guy that the Heat would sell themselves a story on. Like the guy that plays every single game and is all about, right, just being a team player and all that stuff. And obviously that wouldn't be, from everything we've gathered around the Brooklyn Nets, it's something that they'd be interested in. But it still is fascinating from the standpoint of, so Jimmy Butler, that actually is interesting because you bring that up about the player option. What would a contract look like for him if he opted out? You're making $52 million on a 1 year. You have to go back to the market again at 36 years old. But that is an interesting wrinkle to it too. To reference what's going on in the current NBA landscape, you got the Denver Nuggets. We're recording this obviously Tuesday morning after the Monday night, or Tuesday after the Monday night game. Denver Nuggets down 0-2. Do they need to make a change here? Would Jimmy Butler be a piece that would make sense for them? I don't know. Probably not. The New York Knicks, they scrape one out against the Pacers. Okay, how far are they going to go here? Did they want to add a piece? Is it not going to be Donovan Mitchell? And as we talked about the other day, when you start to pull in all of these names, well, who didn't get Donovan Mitchell? Okay, maybe Jimmy Butler's our guy, right? Or vice versa. The more names that get dropped onto the market makes it that much more competitive for every team looking for it. It's almost counterintuitive. You would think, oh, more guys are looking for new teams. That means everybody wins, right? We all get our new player. The problem is the price point starts to increase on all of these guys. And I wonder if the Brooklyn Nets, a team in the market for it, as we keep saying, are going to be willing to over dip into those assets to go get player X, Y, or Z.
I think they might real quick. I will say on that piece, I think they'll probably get saved. If you're of the Nets fan that does not want to add aging assets to this team, right? Like you're not like you're the kind of person that doesn't want to add the older players. Like you're looking for young superstar types. The Nets, almost no matter what, probably get saved by the timing here more than anything else, right? Like even if they thought they were in the Jimmy Butler business, because name brand, tough grit guy. Right, like can do a bunch of stuff, comes up huge in the playoffs. Even if they could sell themselves on the story of that, and I'm not even sure they would, they get saved by the timing here because it's like a year too early, right? Because they're not going to be able to unload the Simmons contract, and they're probably not going to do it. So I think from their standpoint, it's good with the timing here. Look, would we cheer for Jimmy Butler for a season in Brooklyn? Of course, it'd be super fun, but I just don't think it wouldn't be a good long-term move. And I think luckily the way things kind of align here along the timeline, they can't really do it. And so I think like they, if anything else, even if they were interested, I think thankfully
Save yourself from yourself.
kind of, right? Like kind
Yeah.
of. And I'm not even implying that they would. I just think that like it kind of removes all doubt now.
The one other thing there that Pat Riley he mentioned, because he was followed up and asked, like, would you consider trading Jimmy Butler? And he said no. Like, it was a simple
Yeah.
no. The other part of this is negotiations, right? And player options and whether or not they want to keep Jimmy around and where his age stands. How much of this do you think when you hear, specifically when you hear Pat Riley talk like this, how much of it do you think is message sending? Because I mentioned Tyler Hero as well. They asked him about Tyler Hero, and he was like, yeah, if I had to describe him, fragile. Like, and it was like, can't stay on the court. And he said, nobody wants to work, nobody works harder. No one's more dialed in than him. Nobody wants him more than Tyler Hero. But if he isn't available, that creates problems. I'm paraphrasing that quote there. But it was interesting because it felt like two things were happening. And I think a lot of teams go through this. One, it's Pat Riley, it's heat culture. But two, you're like setting up this narrative for your fan base, for these players to be like, hey, maybe things are going to change coming up. Maybe you need to lower your expectations if you want to remain with the Heat, right? Like, it just did seem like there was a lot of stage setting for what their offseason is going to look like. And he's one of the first GMs to be doing so this offseason.
Yeah, and it's probably like not the worst time to do it. They might be in a time of transition, and like how they view sort of their team, and if they're like, because he's not calling out Bam Adebayo, right?
No.
And because like it seems like the plan is to build around Bam here in the short and maybe long term. So if you're just kind of like, hey, don't get too comfortable, we might be making some moves. These are the kind of things you say. It's just rare because you just really don't hear GMs say stuff like this about their players, unless you're Pat Riley and you can just dump all your rings on the table when you court LeBron or like whatever. Like there's a few guys that can probably pull it off. He's one of them. And he might be one of one. Like there might not be another guy that can really do it. That can just talk with this sort of bravado and be like, it's more than about you, right? Like, and we have the rings to prove it. And the winning percentage and like the playoff track record to prove it. So sometimes you're just able to be like the one guy that can pull it off. And that might be Riley being Riley in this case.
Yeah, 100%. Coming up here in a second, let's take a look at legitimately where could Jimmy Butler, man, I tell you what, this guy and his name, Bootler, we don't know for sure. I'm going to be okay. Where are potential teams that he could land on? And what would that create potentially for the Brooklyn Nets in terms of avenues to improve themselves this offseason without going after the cream of the crop, the $50 million man? We'll get into that and possibly untying my tongue, all coming up next.
Before we get to that, I'm going to pause here and tell you a little bit more about our friends over at Monopoly Go. I know what you're saying. It's the whistle there. You already talked about that, but there's just so much good stuff in this game. On Monopoly Go, you can team up with friends for time tournaments. They work together to build up each other's boards. The more you win together, the more awesome prizes you unlock. There's so much to get. You can grab those unique stickers. You can trade with friends to complete albums for big prizes. You can get those new playing pieces to travel the boards with. Hilarious emojis. You can taunt your friends. Everyone loves to taunt their friends when you smash the buildings or heist their vaults. Plus, Monopoly Go feels new and exciting every day. They got constantly changing tournaments and challenges. A ton include their own unique mini games. They dig for treasure. You can grab that robot pachinko machine, and there's always new timed events that help you win big, like massive multipliers for everything you win. And rent frenzies as well. Always something fun to discover in Monopoly Go. So get off the bench. Go download it free on Google Play or the App Store. Game on.
All right, so as we wrap up today's Locked On Nets episode, talking about not only Jimmy Butler, maybe there's something else actually I want to bring up here before we even talk about destinations and impact for the Brooklyn Nets, talking about Pat Riley. When you hear the way Pat Riley talks and you know that he has that track record, not a lot of GMs and effectively, he's more than just the GM down in Miami, if I'm not mistaken.
He's a president. I think he's president of operations.
Yeah, president of operations. There you go. That's the term I was looking for. Do you hear that and see that and think about just relating to the Brooklyn Nets or any team and go, gosh, wouldn't you love to have a guy like this who not only has the track record, but also the bravado and just the willingness to step in front of Mike and go, hey, I'm going to tell you some things. And honestly, I'm not too concerned about who's listening. Like that is something you do not get from GMs around the league. And it's not even a knock on Sean Marks, but to hear all these press conferences from Brooklyn over the last handful of years, listen, we believe we can still attract stars. We got a lot of good options on the table. You'd love for Sean Marks to come out maybe one time and go, yeah, well, you know what? We want guys that are dedicated to being foundational pieces to help build a dynasty in Brooklyn, a lasting legacy. And some guys just aren't built the Brooklyn way. Instead, it's like, It didn't work out, but we obviously love Kevin Durant. We wish him nothing but the best. Like they don't have that, and they don't have the rings in the cabinet to do so, right?
Yeah, well, that's the problem. That's why I call them 101. Like, very few guys have this. Very few guys can come out and just say this. And I really don't think there's anyone else that could talk this sort of I don't even want to call it brazenly, because it's just honestly. You could talk this honestly about players, especially the best players on your team. So I can't really fault other GMs like Marks for not doing it. I think that there have been times where it has felt probably like Marks wasn't strong enough around the right things, right? And I think that is probably a place we could clearly knock him. It's just to say they just didn't take hard stands. Yeah, there wasn't tons of conviction around when things, especially when things were going wrong. It felt very rudderless, and ultimately everyone asked out. And maybe there could have been a time that a steady leadership hand at the very top would have calmed things down. Although the guys that they have problems with have had problems other places. So it's hard to totally fault Marks for that, but they clearly didn't have it. I'll say that. They didn't have sort of that leadership at the top. And at this point too, with the Nets, I mean, Marks is the only guy left. I mean, literally every person's gone. There's nobody left. All the coaches have changed. All the players have changed. The performance staff seems like they're about to change, or it might have already changed. It's him and Sai, and that's the whole thing.
Did not think we would get to this on today's episode, but the performance staff changing over the last handful of years, it's been one of the best medical staffs, one of the best performing staffs, one of the best training staffs in the business. And I know that's just something that gets said, but it's one of the best staffs in the biz, huh? By the way, we'll be turning over the entire operation. It's interesting. Something must not be lining up if you're making that type of sweeping change. That's not.
Well, the thing about those platitudes is it's always so hard to trust it, because it's I mean, what are you gonna say? These guys are the worst. When they're working for it, it's these guys couldn't heal. These guys couldn't heal a paper cut.
Onion.
I was these guys couldn't heal. They couldn't heal a paper cut. What do you want them to do? So I think that
I stubbed my toe. They put a cast on my arm. I mean, which way is up? I just
never trust stuff like that, good or bad. It sounds great, and it sounds great till it's just not true anymore. And then that's just kind of the story with the performance staff thing. I think there's rumors that there's going to be a shakeup. Now, usually that just means there's going to be, but I'm not sure they've made any key moves. And it's not like any of us, I'll be honest with you too. It's not like any of us can go in here and evaluate a new performance staff, right? So I know no one would even pretend to. Yeah, if you're these guys are the best, but.
God.
You see the paper they published in AMA?
This on top.
Amazing. So I don't think there's a way for us to evaluate it, but I also don't evaluate internal organizational, compliments sometimes, because for the same reason, which actually I bring it back to the Heat, which is why the Riley quotes are so fascinating, because you never get these kind of quotes. You usually get they're the best performance staff in the biz. Oh yeah, they're all fired. And the next group's going to be the best performance staff in the biz. It's why when it goes the other way, it's so fascinating.
James Butler, then, if we could, James Tiberius Butler. Do you think ultimately that he will be on a different team next season? Do you think this was seeds in the water of at least the Miami Heat saying, hey, because more than anything, this is what I think it signals for Miami. We're letting everybody know that the Heat culture and Jimmy Butler may not be totally aligned anymore. So depending on how the playoffs go for your particular team, you could probably add this player if the price is right, even though we said no. Same thing maybe for Tyler Hero, fragile otherwise. It's funny because when you look at his contract and he's under until 26, 27, 33 million, he'll make 29 million next year. I don't, where does that fall in the spectrum of cost versus production and availability, which is what Pat Riley spoke to as well. Do you think that there is player movement for Miami ultimately?
I think there could be. I could see a situation where I don't trust are you going to trade him? No piece, right? I also think that it's probably in their best interest to stick it out one more year and see if they can reload a little bit around them, because they probably have something like a deep playoff run if everyone can stay healthy. If he's actually on the court with Bam, they made the finals 2 years ago, right? So it's not like there's what's that?
No, that's the reality. This is a team, when healthy, that makes deep playoff runs in the East every single year.
Yeah, they made the finals. They won a game from Boston when they had nobody, right? So it's like, I don't know. They could talk themselves into it. I could also see other teams like, I think Philly, going back to Philly would be fascinating, right? Like, because that a guy that would
Yes.
be like the 1-to-1 like Tobias Harris replacement, not in terms of just like how they play, but just could you imagine if it was Jimmy Butler instead of Tobias Harris in the Knicks series? They win,
Yeah.
right? Like if Butler's healthy, like they easily
Yeah.
beat the Knicks, right? If that, Tobias Harris had 0 points on over 2 shooting in 30 minutes in the final game. Like,
Hey,
so,
whatever.
I mean, literally anybody, it feels like, with those 30 minutes, and the Knicks would have won. But and they have a really clean cap. I don't know. I could see something like that happening. Short of that, it's a little probably harder to see. But I think like a thing like that is kind of realistic. And so, yeah, I don't know. I think in the end, I would say he's still on the team, but I don't know. There's just enough of a question mark, which I didn't even think there would be a question mark, which is why the NBA is just undefeated with kind of giving us news like this.
We're going to talk about one of the players on the New Orleans Pelicans and Brendan Ingram coming up this week at some point, probably as well. I'll throw out the Pelicans though, like a team that maybe just needs that dude, that guy behind Zion. I love looking across the NBA landscape, looking at maybe young talent, right, rising talent, and going, well, what if I stuck this bulldog veteran alongside of you that gives you all of that kind of energy? And listen, maybe 2 years from now, it doesn't feel so good, right? But for a window, for a moment, you can really start to elevate your team. So I like, especially with Jimmy Butler, I like putting in places. And I'll just say back at the top again, if you told me right now that cost preclude or that the Miami Heat were into Ben Simmons, I would love to have Jimmy Butler on the Nets for a season. He's everything you want in a player when he's on the court. So just from a pure player level, sign me up instantly if the Brooklyn Nets could make that happen without it being anything other than, hey, Ben Simmons contract and maybe, a pick.
Yeah, look, adding good players is always more fun than getting rid of good players, like in the
Always
NBA.
more gooder.
And always better to be gooder. Yeah, it's 2 episodes in a row. And so it's always more fun. And this is where, if the Nets were to trade for the Mitchells or the, of the world, where we think about, sometimes we only usually, again, and I'll finish with this, we only usually argue about the price, not the player, right? It's always just the price. And, if you could add Donovan Mitchell and would make the Nets, Jimmy Butler, would it make the Nets better next year? Yes. And that would be more fun. It might cost us 5 years from now or 3 years from now, but the short-term gains would clearly be winners. And look, it's always fun to root for teams that win.
Real quick, whoopsie-daisy, we'll get out the door. Cleveland. Why not Jimmy Butler to Cleveland? Why not if they want to keep Donovan Mitchell? Hey, we're going to bring in Jimmy Butler for the last 2 years of his deal with a player option. I don't know. Just something I'm throwing out there. Just things that really ruin the Nets' future. That's a really good, like, you think Donovan Mitchell wouldn't be pretty excited to put Jimmy Butler on the court next to him for a season and then another one after that as they're both on the same contract timeline? Sorry, guys. I like to do it as we get out the door.
Yeah, like Garland, Darius Garland going out. Yeah, it's interesting. I don't think that probably couldn't find it there, but at least it's interesting. Okay, we're going to get out of here. We never even got to this, like the Timberwolves and Nuggets, which is like unbelievable. We'll talk about that later in the week. We'll just end up talking about it later in the week because they have a few days off till they play again. But like, it's almost burying the lead with like how I'm just like actually just totally shocked right now on that series. So we'll get into that later in the week. We'll talk Ingram. We'll talk some more stuff. In the meantime, make sure you're subscribed over at Locked On Nets on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts.
Which of these quotes is from Pat Riley, Doug? Complacency is the last hurdle standing between any team and its potential greatness, or excellence is the gradual result of always striving to do better.
Option C, both.
He gets it every time, boys. Big door prize. You get a Pat Riley signed autograph poster and some pomade.
One of the all-time great poets. We'll be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.
Basketball, yeah.